I suppose it's time we talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene today. I think it's time to go ahead and engage in that little bit of info. So, for those who don't know, this woman's a nut. Okay, I'm gonna poison that well. I've done videos on her before. I do not like this woman. I think she's dangerous. I think she's an asshole.
Oh boy, we're starting off the video with an ad hominem personal attack. That's a good sign.
And she supposedly represents my district. I cannot think of anybody who so thoroughly represents Georgia, at least this area in Georgia, but also so vehemently does not represent me.
And it's at this point that Suris learns what the problem with democracy is. If all of your neighbors support something, then you're forced to support it too, even if you don't want to.
But something interesting happened. So, Marjorie is a transphobe. She's been supporting transphobic bills. She is, again, an asshole.
You seem to be throwing quite a bit of loaded language and personal attacks at her, Suris. So I'm assuming you're going to be backing these claims up with facts and evidence?
Now, I think if you didn't know all that, maybe it'd be a good idea for us to go over something interesting that happened. Okay? This is... well, take a look at it yourself. Congresswoman Mary Nguyen says our neighbor, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, tried to block the Equality Act. Sorry, had to sneeze.
I think that was Suris's brain having to reboot, because it's being overloaded with too much stupidity.
Tried to block the Equality Act.
Good. The Equality Act should be blocked, because in spite of what its name may suggest, it doesn't actually have anything to do with equality. The Equality Act is more about authoritarianism and expanding the power of government to push a political agenda onto people against their consent.
Because she believes prohibiting discrimination against trans Americans is disgusting, immoral, and evil.
Well, yeah, I agree. People have the right to discriminate. Nobody owes you their time, labor, resources, or use of their property. If a business is refusing to serve you because you're transgender, then go to a different business.
Thought we'd put up our transgender flag so she can look at it every time she opens her door. Like, look at that. Look at that. Just, fuck you, transphobe.
Yeah, you keep accusing this woman of being a transphobe, but I'd like to see some evidence for that.
Now, I like that. That's a nice power move. That's a really nice power move. I like it.
Not really. I mean, all she did was put out a piece of cloth. Like, yeah, way to put that piece of cloth on the wall. You sure showed her.
So, what does Marjorie do? Our neighbor, Representative Mary Nguyen, wants to pass the so-called Equality Act to destroy women's rights and religious freedoms.
Yeah, that's exactly what the Equality Act would do. The Equality Act would destroy religious freedom, because it would mean that religious institutions would be forced to recognize someone as their gender they identify with, even if that goes against their religion, and it would violate women's rights. Because if men could just access women's spaces by saying they're women, that would basically render useless any sort of safeguards that women need. There are perfectly valid reasons why a place may want to segregate based on biological gender, regardless of how people identify. For example, suppose that a husband beats his wife so severely that she has to be admitted to a women's shelter, and now that husband can gain access to that women's shelter by simply identifying as a woman. That's one very plausible possibility of an issue that may arise when society is forced to disregard biological sex. How about instead of just repeating your opponent's arguments in a mocking tone, you actually, I don't know, make an argument?
And if you're one of those people who's going to comment that you don't like the fact that I'm making an idiot sound like a fucking idiot, well, you know my opinion already.
My problem isn't that you're making an idiot sound like an idiot, it's that you're taking for granted that this person is an idiot without actually providing any sort of substantive argumentation.
Thought we'd put up ours, so she can look at it every time she opens her door. Well, so what does she put up? There are two genders. Trust the science. So, I guess we're ignoring sociology and...
So how exactly is she ignoring sociology? Look, Suris, whenever you make a claim, you need to back it up. You can't just make a claim, leave it on the table, and expect us to take it for granted. That's not how that works. If you're going to say that she's ignoring sociology, you need to provide an explanation as to why or how she's ignoring sociology.
Oh, by the way, something neat happened. So, currently, Marjorie Taylor Greene is trending. There was also science trending earlier. Ha, here it is. On politics trending. After Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene placed an anti-trans sign outside of her office in response to the transgender pride flag, many are pointing out that science widely understands that there's a breadth of genetic chromosomal variations besides XX and XY. You know, like XXY, various forms of intersex, there's Klinefelters, there's a lot of stuff there.
So it is correct that not everyone necessarily falls into the categories of male or female. Some people are born intersex, so they have both sets of genitalia. Some people have Klinefelter syndrome, so they don't have the typical XX or XY chromosome pair. So this is true. However, there are several things you have to consider. First of all, conditions like this are typically rare. A majority of the human population does fall into the category of male or female. The fact that you found one specific and narrow exception to a rule doesn't on its face mean that rule is invalid. It would be like arguing that since balloons float when you release them, that means that the concept of gravity is invalid. The second thing you need to consider is that even though intersex and Klinefelter's people don't necessarily fall into the categories of male or female, they will still usually lean one way or the other. For example, an intersex person may have both male and female features, but they may also have predominantly male or female features. So in cases like this, they'll usually just identify with whichever set of features is more prominent. And even if it was the case that the existence of intersex or Klinefelter's people meant that there were in fact more than two genders, that still wouldn't make gender arbitrary or something that you could decide. All that would really mean is that now there's three genders. Every other aspect of the logic would remain the same.
Oh, but that's just accepting the fact that we already know that Marjorie is going to be confusing. C, misunderstanding. C, being a moron.
So you're automatically jumping to the conclusion that someone's a moron just because they're confusing two different concepts that are similar? Gee, Suris, you're really not being intellectually honest towards this person here.
The difference between sex and gender.
Are you going to explain what the difference is between sex and gender? That seems to be a crucial component to your argument.
See, transgender flag versus Marjorie saying that there are two genders, but then clearly arguing for science. She's clearly trying to stick in the biological categories of things. That's a nice, convenient place to be. Ignoring that we have a bimodal spectrum there as well.
A majority of people falling into two distinct categories with only a minor, small handful of exceptions is hardly what I'd call a spectrum.
Just imagine the type of person you have to be to hear, probably every day, what gender is versus what sex is. Misunderstand it.
Okay, so at this point you're just making conjecture. We have no idea whether or not this woman has the difference between sex and gender explained to her every day, nor do we know whether or not she understands it. It could very well be the case that she does understand it, but just so happens to disagree with your viewpoint, which is completely within the realm of possibility since we never get to hear her side of it. And all of this is essentially moot because, again, Suris never explains what the difference is between sex and gender. Since that's a crucial aspect of his argument, that's kind of important.
And then try to put a thing in front of your office where you're basically just being a transphobe.
No.
What was transphobic about what she said? All she's saying is that there's only two genders. She's not saying that a person born of one gender can't transition to the other. Like, saying that there's only two genders doesn't necessarily, on its face, rule out the existence of transgender people. What she's saying mostly has to do with the lunatics who are like, my gender is demi-unicorn or some shit like that.
Imagine being a non-binary person in District 14 of Georgia.
So, in case you're not aware, what non-binary basically means is that you don't really fit into the categories of male or female, which is a thing. Like I've mentioned earlier, some people are born intersex or with Klinefelter syndrome, so they don't necessarily fit into the categories of male or female. So this is a thing. However, it is rare. An overwhelming majority of people do fit into the categories of male or female. So it kind of does make sense that a politician wouldn't be overly concerned with non-binary people, just because there's not a whole lot of them. They only make up at best a tiny fraction of her constituency.
And this is the person who's supposed to represent you in the House of Representatives in the United States.
So let's for a moment put to the side the issue of whether or not non-binary is a thing. It seems as if Suris takes issue with people being forced to pay for politicians who don't actually represent their interest. And I agree with him, that is pretty bogus. So, Suris, why not become a libertarian and advocate for abolishing taxation?
This is the person who holds an office up there. And she's supposed to be fighting for your rights, well, everything.
So for a brief moment the mask slips off, and Suris basically admits, yeah, I think the government should be doing everything for you, like a typical liberal.
Just imagine what it's like to deal with that every day. To know that you're dealing with a bigot.
Yeah, you have yet to prove that she's actually a bigot. She hasn't really said anything bigoted or hateful or anything like that. All she really said was that there's only two genders. And she's right.
Who's willing to just, when somebody puts up a trans pride flag, is willing to respond in the way that she did.
Yeah, I don't really see anything wrong with what she did. She was just exercising her First Amendment right to express a viewpoint that she holds. It's the exact same right that the other person was exercising when they put up that transgender flag. And let's be honest, what she put up was actually pretty benign. I mean, I'd understand the outrage somewhat if she put up a sign that says trans people suck or trans people will burn in hell or something like that. But no, the sign just says there's only two genders, that's it.
This is one of those things where, like, if you merely have the opinion that, hey, there are two biological sexes because you're assuming it's from gametes, I don't necessarily know if you're a bigot. I just know that you've got an opinion and whatever. But when you do that in response to somebody, championing the existence of a minority group, now I know you're being a bigot. Now I know you're being an asshole.
So let me get this straight. You're okay with people holding opinions you disagree with, but not if they're expressing those viewpoints in opposition to someone who holds an opinion you agree with. So it's okay to hold opinions you disagree with as long as we don't express them, is basically what you're saying there.
Now I know that you... it's like with the... What was it that happened? The white pride thing, when there were people who were going, what's wrong with saying white pride? What's wrong with saying straight pride?
Yeah, what's wrong with saying white pride or straight pride? Aren't white and straight people, people too? If other groups have a right to be proud of their race or sexual orientation, why not them?
When you had to respond, most of this is happening in response to Black Power or gay pride.
Why should that make a difference? What, do you think people are entitled to an echo chamber? Where they can just spout their viewpoints all they want and no one's allowed to criticize them? Unless these white pride or straight pride events involve any sort of harassment towards other groups, I don't see anything wrong with them. If a gay pride event is not calling for violence against straight people, or if a straight pride event is not calling for violence against gay people, I'm cool with it.
So you have to wonder what's happening when the minority group is saying we're proud of who we are, and you feel like such a victim that you have to do the exact same thing.
Well, here's the thing, Suris. Sometimes these activist groups do go too far, and they start doing things like attacking people or destroying property or trying to say nonsense like all white people are racist. So it's not like people are saying they're victims simply because there's activism out there.
When you're the oppressor here.
Whoa, that's a bit of a bold accusation, Suris. Who exactly is the oppressor? Straight white people? Because I'm straight and white, and I've never once oppressed anyone for being black or gay or whatever. Funny how the left always says that they're against making sweeping generalizations about certain groups of people, but then turn around and say shit like this.
Marjorie, if you see this video, I know you won't, because you ride up on a high horse until we elect you out.
If we libertarians had our way, she would have never been riding up on a high horse at all. I think Suris is almost a libertarian. Like, the skepticism toward government is there. He's really close to being a libertarian.
But if you see this, just know you're a disgusting human being. I do not like your guts. I think you are a terrible person
For what? All she did was put up a sign that says there's only two genders. And just for that, you're making it out to be as if she's worse than Hitler. Are you really going to hate someone's guts just because they hold an opinion you disagree with? Because if you are, then quite honestly, you need to grow the fuck up and mature. Because I can get along with people who I disagree with just fine. I actually have some friends who are left-wingers and liberals.
You're the type of person who harasses somebody after a school shooting. You're the type of person who, when a minority group explains that their rights are being tread upon, you celebrate taking away their rights.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a citation for both of those accusations. Because at this point, all you're doing is spewing out ad hominem personal attacks.
Marjorie, you're a piece of human filth.
Wow, way to be hypocritical, Suris. Suris is the kind of person who goes on and on about how gay people are people too, trans people are people too, but people who hold opinions you disagree with? Fuck them, they're subhuman piles of filth, right?
And I don't care if there's one person in my chat or my audience or my viewership who's going to say, no, Suris, you're being hyperbolic. No, you're being mean. You're not supposed to be mean. You're supposed to be analytical.
I don't really give a shit if you want to be mean. If you want to make a video with nothing but ad hominem personal attacks, it's a free country with free speech, that's your right. But don't expect anyone to be convinced of your position. Let's, for the sake of argument, assume that what Marjorie Taylor was saying was actually hateful or bigoted or whatever. And let's say she did just so happen to stumble upon your video. Do you think her hearing you whine like a child and talk shit about her would be more likely to get her to change her mind than well-reasoned and rational argumentation?
I don't give a shit. If it's human rights we're talking about, I will be as mean as I want to.
So when you perceive the subject matter to be of particularly high importance, that's when you use personal attacks instead of well-reasoned arguments? Yeah, that's not really how it works. You're not exempt from having to back up your arguments with valid logic, because you feel particularly passionate about the subject matter.
And that's all I gotta say about that.
Really? That's all you have to say? Because that was frankly unimpressive. Like, there was very little substantive argumentation in that video. Most of the time, if he wasn't levying personal attacks against Marjorie Taylor Greene, he was pulling unsubstantiated accusations out of his ass. And the thing is, I don't even really care about transgenderism. Like, you know, I'm a libertarian, I believe in a non-aggression principle. So if a dude wants to just put on a dress and makeup and say they're a woman, as long as they're not hurting anyone, they can knock themselves out. I don't care. The reason I chose to respond to this video is just because the arguments are so bad and fundamentally broken. This has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Until next time, take care.